Hi, everyone, and welcome to Princess State of Mind, the show where we talk about fiction, fairy tales, and the fairer sex. This is another special Disney March Madness episode of Princess State of Mind, and I'm very pleased to be back with my co-host for Disney March Madness, C.S. Johnson. Hi, CJ.
Hey there.
And we also have with us, I'm delighted to have with us, the assistant editor of the Claremont Review of Books and the American Mind, Spencer Klavan, who also happens to be my brother. Hi, Spencer. Yeah, Spencer's having some glitchiness with internet.
It is so good to be here with you.
It's great to have you. So yeah, we're going to do our very best. We're having some technical difficulties with the internet going back and forth between me and Spencer, but we're just going to hang out. It's going to be great. So we are talking all about villains. We just finished round 2 of Disney March Madness all the way through. And so we've lost some villains. We have some villains still in the running, and we're very excited for, I guess it's the semifinals that happens next. Is that right?
That's what they're called.
I don't know anything about sports. But anyway, so yeah, the semifinals are coming up, and we thought it'd be fun to just have a conversation about villains in fiction in general, and sort of touching back in on our friends at Disney as we go. So I kind of wanted to start with just a very broad question, which, and you can take it as you will, both of you, whoever wants to answer first, is what makes a great fictional villain?
Okay, I'll let Spencer go first.
Okay, here I am. So I was actually trying to think about this because I was assuming that I would want to talk about villains throughout history in all different kinds of literature, and I got this sort of funny list of people, all of whom might or might not qualify as villains. So, like, for example, Medea, who's this famous witch from ancient Greek myth. Does she qualify? She's famously misunderstood. We kind of sympathize with her. She's terribly scorned by her husband, Jason, who leaves her for another. Well, or doesn't even leave her, just decides he's also going to have another woman whom he marries. And there's this sort of tension between she does very, very terrible things and to us kind of unjustifiable things in response to that. Like, spoiler alert, she kills her children, and that is bad because they're innocent people and didn't do anything to hurt her, but at the same time, we sort of know and like her. Similarly, let's see, who are some of the other people? Right? I mean, there's definitely a difference between like villain and just misunderstood, right? If you're somebody that is just kind of lovable and you get on the wrong side of something, that's sort of not being a villain. But then you can't be. I think sort of too cartoonish and just pure evil in order to be a worthwhile and interesting villain. Like, you have to have some kind of fun backstory. So I don't have a good definition of sort of what makes somebody a villain as opposed to just somebody that does some bad stuff, except that there has to be a kind of, like, I think, enjoyment, a relishing of evil. You have to have reached some point at which you're actually trying to do Richard III in Shakespeare says something like, I am determined to be a villain. And that is kind of summed it up. Like, you have to really be loving what you're doing in order to be a delicious fictional villain.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's a way in which, I don't know who said this or if lots of people have said this, but there's a way in which a villain is, for example, when someone is acting in a role as a villain, you want to feel like they think they're the good guy, right? Like you want to feel like they believe that what they're doing is either the right thing, or, as you say about Richard III, they know it's the wrong thing, but they feel somehow justified in doing that wrong thing anyway. So I think there's a way, perhaps, in which a good fictional villain is invested in their villainy in a way that they're able to kind of like rationalize and morally explain themselves, when we as real people wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good point, because in that same speech where Richard III says, I am determined to be a villain, part of what he says is, okay, so war is over and now in peace, everybody goes out and they sleep with each other and they have all this fun sort of being in love. I am very, very ugly and deformed, and I can't do that, and so I'm just going to set myself against everything that is going on. And one sort of way of interpreting that is to say, well, actually, the world is structured, the society is structured in such a way that good and evil are like the deck is stacked against you, and the system of values is so messed up. Somebody who, like, through no fault of his own, somebody who can't succeed has to just commit to being against that system of values. In that system of values, I'm going to be called evil. So whatever it is that's called evil, that's what I'm going to do. So there is I guess, a version of villainy that you can say is like set against society. Like all of it, we live in a society in which like the good is called evil and the evil is called good, and so I'm going to kind of be evil because I believe that's actually the only way to really be good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also a sort of victim complex too. Like, no one understands me. I am going to be this way because the whole world is stacked in someone else's favor. So I might as well just completely misbehave. What about you, CJ? Do you have a definition of a good fictional villain?
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I like how you guys are bringing in the different kind of like, so like on an individual level, villainy is kind of like you have the opportunity and the motivation and the temptation to commit something that you kind of perceive as wrong. And then like, the thing that I keep kind of coming back to with villainy is the idea of like C.S. Lewis talking in his Space Trilogy about how humans are kind of like bent towards darkness. And I think when I think of villainy, I think of people who like lean into that bent. So when Sheryl Sandberg like said that was the name of her thing, I was like, oh my gosh, please no. Yes, people lean into that. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Spencer.
An interesting kind of comparison. Yeah, I am. I don't know if the internet's working, but an interesting kind of comparison case here is Huckleberry Finn in Mark Twain. Huckleberry Finn says he is in a society that does have really messed up values in that it has slavery, and so he's helping this slave to escape, and he thinks he's going to go to hell for it. And so he has this moment where he sort of says, maybe I won't go to hell, or maybe I should just turn this slave in. And he thinks sort of deeply about the humanity of this person that he now knows was his friend. I'll go to hell. He says, I will take the condemnation that my society tells me is in store for me. And that's an example of somebody who's actually a hero for doing what a villain does because the society around him is evil in some way. Whereas somebody who does that same thing, but in a society that we generally recognize to be good and to be right about what is evil and what is wrong, is a villain. So it kind of depends also, I think, on the way that the work of art wants us to perceive this society. Are we supposed to generally endorse the vision of life that the villain operates within? And if so, how can we react to his rejection of that vision, except by feeling like they're terrible, even though we kind of like them, and they, as CJ says, they play to some impulse in us that just wants chaos and disaster and darkness.
Well, this actually ties in pretty well with my personal definition of a villain in fiction, which is that I think a lot of the time a good villain is someone whose nature, the thing that they were meant to be, has been corrupted in some way. So, for example, coming at it from fairy tales, you often get like a wicked stepmother, right? And she is someone who was supposed to be a mother, which is something good and nurturing and kind and caring, but instead has become evil because she's not doing the thing that she is meant to do. And instead, she is forcing the child in some way to not grow up for her own random reasons. And that kind of goes with what you're saying about Huck Finn, which is that he is not going against his nature. He is exactly playing into his nature, which is to be a good person, even though the society around him is not saying that that's right. So the reason that he's a hero and not a villain, I am sort of positing, is that when faced with this choice, he goes with what his inner self is meant to be. So I don't know. I mean, and again, and I'm thinking also about, so female villains is that, but then male villains, you know, when they use their masculine urges for to hurt instead of to protect, that is another corruption of something that was meant to be good, but now is being turned to evil. So I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's what I came up with.
So one thing that does, one thing that does is so a way in which that's really interesting is that it makes particularly exciting the villains who are supposed to be something, who are something in life that is really hard to be just naturally. And that is kind of, I think, one of the most interesting versions of the villain. Like, if you do think Dia is a villain, then it's really hard to be, as she herself says in Ricky's version of the play, as she says, it's awful to be a woman in this society. And so I am fighting back against the terrible things that are being done to me. I'm also thinking of Iago in Shakespeare's Othello, who is this evil sort of servant. And he has this whole speech about what being a servant is. And you're right that he does. I mean, his villainy is a lot about kind of perverting and corrupting the nature of servanthood and becoming sort of duplicitous and self-serving when he's supposed to be generous and thoughtful and so on. But as Iago points out, servitude is...
Oh, we lost you for a second there. Okay, we'll come back to you.
Have that.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
come back to that.
Did I cut out?
Yeah, you cut out for a second, but that's okay. Yeah, I think we got it. I'm gonna move away from you for a second so that your internet catches up. So I think that within this idea, right, because it's a little bit of a tricky idea because certain people are being asked by society to be a certain way, but breaking out of that is actually good, like Huck Finn. And sometimes society is asking you to do something which is a good thing, and breaking out of that is evil. So it's a little bit of a tricky distinction, but it kind of leads me to my next question, which CJ can answer because Spencer has disappeared, is the difference between male and female villains. Because I was just talking about how these mother figures are evil when they are corrupted, because when they become something other than a mother, but they're still in this mother role. And then I'm thinking of like Gaston, for example, who is someone who ought to be able, who's my favorite, and I can't believe he's gone. But
forever, it's okay.
But you know, he is someone who has all of this masculine power, and instead of using it to protect people and take care of people and take care of the people in the town and whatever, he uses it to try to get Belle, and he uses his lust to try to get Belle as well. So I'm wondering, is there a distinction between what makes a woman evil versus what makes a man evil?
I think, and I will say, like, generally speaking, because there always are exceptions to this, I do think it does come down to kind of like women are meant to be more caring and nurturing, and we desire connection. Like, you see a lot of the female villains are more likely to be an outcast in their particular way, and then like with the men, I feel like they're more it's not like the like, I feel like women have more of a lack in some areas when it comes to connection and their desire to work with other people, or something like Ursula's kind of like the sea witch and outcast, and Mother Gothel's got her tower.
Right.
Gaston and like Scar, these are people that are like central figures to the community. They're just, it's an abundance of their kind of like that toxic element to the, whether it's vanity ambition or and then their ability to kind of like move within the system.
Yes, sorry, I'm now communicating with Spencer, who's continuing to have technical difficulties. So you and I are just going to keep talking about this, and if he can come back, he's going to come back, and if he can't,
on a side note, I've always maintained that the internet is a woman.
Yes. So yeah, so we'll just chat about this, and then we'll have Spencer on another time if he can't come back in. But he'll show up in the bottom if he can. So, and I'll keep in touch with him. So yeah, I think that I think that one thing that's true. Here's Spencer again. Let's try him. Hi, welcome back.
Hi, I'm back.
We're talking between
Thank you.
Male and female villains, and whether the way in which a woman is villainous is different than the way a male person is villainous. Do you have thoughts on that before you cut out again?
That is a good question. I think that your theory of kind of perverted natures or corrupted natures would definitely suggest the answer is yes in a big way. And that the way that women are in the world and also the roles that they fill in stories are suited to certain kinds of excesses and corruptions, and the way that men are suited sort of to others. And Disney works really well for this, right? The villains like Gaston are fundamentally very, very different from villains like Ursula. Even, I mean, the misuse of force is obviously a hallmark of many male villains, or the misuse of smarts. This kind of trickery. Because there's another version of sort of archetypical female villainy that is also very tricksy, but it's more in a kind of relational way, I guess, is one way of putting it. The sort of use of seduction or the use of whatever. I mean, I was one possible female villain I was toying with from the Odyssey, who's like many female villains. She's a witch, and she turns men into pigs when they come, because she uses sort of their basic lusts to make them into what they really are acting like. And I think that's another big hallmark of good, compelling female villainy. And I generally, with this stuff, I tend to think that when you put female characters into archetypical male roles, by and large, it tends not to work, or to play as hollow and false and not particularly interesting. Even the great kind of goddesses who are not villains, but who do sometimes sort of scheme against mortals, are most exciting and compelling when they're kind of acting in those female ways. Yeah, I think that's true. When I think about, famously this movie, what's it called, Birds of Prey or whatever, which is about kind of these villainesses, but is also super actiony, has been tanking at the box office because it sort of puts women into male villain roles, and it's obviously kind of boring and falls flat. So yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, right. So it seems, I think what we're sort of all kind of touching on here is that the ways that the things that make women women, that the traits that are inherent to women are the traits that make them villains when they become villains. They corrupt them or somehow invert them or use them for evil reasons. So, women are sexually appealing to men, and they're meant to be caring and nurturing, but instead, if they use their sex appeal to lure men to their deaths or to transform them into strange farmyard animals, then that is a corruption of something that is good inside of them. Similarly, you were talking about Gaston, and I was talking about Gaston before when you were gone, and he, again, he is someone who is taking his masculine traits of lust and power and physical strength and using them to do something other than protect people, and that's bad. And similarly, when a character is because you also have the version of a male villain that's kind of like a coward and sort of like a little I don't know what word I'm looking for, but just kind of like Jafar if we're going
Yeah.
for villains, is sort of like he's kind of effeminate and he wants power because he doesn't really have it. He's not particularly masculine, I guess. And I don't think you have to be actually physically masculine in order to be a hero. And I am super in favor of all the geeks and nerds unite. But I think that what you do have to have is a sort of internal strength and courage that some of that if you don't have, you can be that other kind of sort of conniving, scheming sort of male villain.
So here's something really interesting, I think, about when it comes to gender, because there totally is like the Weasley male villain as well as the sort of brute male villain. And they're both these falling away from, or these corruptions of masculinity and manhood. But as you're talking, it's occurring to me that this idea that all villainy, all human villainy is a kind of falling away from something good, that you're inherently good, but you're kind of corrupted into this excess or dark thing, is a distinctly Christian idea. It's famous in the works of Augustine, St. Augustine, who was a 5th century bishop. But in general, in Christianity, we believe that both male and female people are good that have inherently female and male ways of being inherently good. Whereas a lot of these Greek female villains that I'm talking about, many Greek philosophers would have said that just is being a woman. They just are, the ways that they're evil are womanhood, because there's just a ton of sort of anti-woman sentiment in ancient Greek societies and a lot of pre-Christian ancient societies. And famously, Christianity, despite its many sort of failings across time, has a very high view of womanhood and high ideas about women. So we are talking, I think, now in a way that a Christian society can take for granted, but that not all societies have taken for granted in their ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Sorry, CJ, you want to say something?
No, it's I was gonna say, like, you definitely see the kind of like the good and evil kind of dichotomy with that. I mean, even in like Asian literature, they have the masculine and the feminine and the yin and the yang. I think it's especially evident in the Christian literature, just in the kind of base that we see in the Western world. But I can also say, like, this is, I really don't like arguing with like certain people on Twitter about men and women, because they definitely are different. And all I have to say is, what's the difference between Michael Scott and Leslie Knope? And you can definitely tell that women and men are funny in different ways. So it makes sense that they would be villainous in different ways. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of brings me to, I mean, Spencer, you already sort of touched on this a little bit, but I'm thinking about how now in the age of modern feminism, many, many women are being placed in the role of hero. And, you know, Spencer, you were talking about Birds of Prey, which they are villains, but then we're supposed to like them or something. I don't know, I didn't see the movie. But this idea that now we should take, in order to make it be equal between the sexes, we should allow female characters to do male things, and then they're supposed to be the hero of the story. So, you know, I mean, I just watched, this is kind of irrelevant, but I just watched The Iron Lady about Margaret Thatcher, and the whole story is about how important it is that she left her children at home. And there's this scene of the children like running after her, like, mommy, like, mommy, you know, don't go. And the movie was not very good, don't watch it. But my point, which I do have, is that now we're seeing these women characters who are going against what we would sort of call the traditional nature of women in order to act more like men. And then they're supposed to be the hero of the movie. And I kind of wonder what that does for villains, because if the villains are supposed to be corrupt in their very nature, and that's what makes them villainous, what happens when we put them out there as antithetical to their very nature? Do they become villains or heroes?
I
Fascinating.
struggle with this.
Well, I think.
Sorry, I just struggle with this because I'm more of an individualist, so I can. I think working on either way.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that can be tricky both in literature and in real life when you talk about this stuff is that everybody is unique and has totally different ways of living, and we, in terms of archetypes, we also know that what's interesting is when a person is in that archetype and you've ever seen before, and there's a huge range of variation. But I also think that in stories, people fill roles, especially in fairy tales and myths and legends and so on. I mean, it's a little bit different when you get to narratives that are not. I mean, the funny thing about villainy is that it doesn't exist except in those forms, right? Because nobody is sort of villainous except in a narrative that you would tell about. Yeah, exactly. And so we are talking in terms of stories that cast people in these very clearly defined roles. And then what's interesting is that real humans, recognizable humans with real traits, can kind of come to fill those roles as they sort of lean into their nature or lean away from it. So I guess I feel like the answer to your question, Faith, is that one thing that feminism does to women is it makes them into sort of subpar men.
Exactly.
And another thing that it does is it holds up for them an ideal of masculinity and manhood that's actually already villainous. There's already a great deal of corruption in the version of manhood and the ideal of masculinity that modern feminism believes in. It's kind of forceful and brutish and vulgar and aggressive in every circumstance. There's a video that just came out by Taylor Swift called something like "If I Was a Man," and it's just her pretending to be a man, but she's or the man or something. And it's her pretending to be a terrible person, right? I mean, it's like she's a terrible masculine person, but she's terrible. She's like, defecating in public, urinating in public. And yeah, I think that is a good example of kind of what we're talking about. That you either get people, because sometimes you get women imagined in like Captain Marvel, for example, you get women kind of imagined into this thing that doesn't exist, which is basically just like they're men, basically. And then sometimes you get women asked to fill these roles that are not virtuous male roles. They're just sort of excessive, boorish male roles.
Yes, I can't tell if now you're frozen or if you're done talking. No, I agree. I think, first of all, I completely agree that in real life, people are individual and therefore we can't classify them as villainous necessarily. I mean, obviously some people are evil, like Hitler, but in general, we can't really say, oh, well, if a woman is acting more like a man, that makes her a villain. That's in real life. Obviously, that's not true. In the same way that I've always been saying that like fairy tales are more symbols than meant to be taken literally. This same thing is true that in a story, as you're saying, Spencer, we get these kinds of good versus evil narratives that just don't really appear that often in real life. And so a woman who is going out there and being the head of a company is not necessarily evil unless she has sold her children to sex traffickers in order to do it. So I think that we are really talking about fiction and the ways in which fiction draws on these kind of tropes and what that means. But I feel that we have now reached the point in the show where I must make a confession and you all must absolve me in some way. I feel that we've gotten far enough into this episode that I can now confess something which I think you both certainly know and most people who follow me in any social media, which is that I have a psychological problem, which is that I often fall in love with the wrong character in the story, the villain. So, we all know that I have a particular penchant for Gaston, but I'm also thinking about like the Phantom of the Opera, who clearly is not meant to end up with Christine at the end of that story, but I really want him to. And also, I'm also drawn to people who are actually good guys, but sort of exhibit many of these bad guy qualities. For example, Edward Rochester from Jane Eyre. So this is the problem that I have, and we can all discuss that if we need to, and I can seek help. But
I might have to charge you at that point.
What's that?
I might have to charge you at that point.
So we'll move on. But my point here is that I think, regardless of my own personal issue, I do think that there is a way in which villains are appealing. Maybe not as appealing as I often find them, but I do think that they are sometimes more interesting than perhaps the hero of a story, or that they have some sort of appeal to us. And I'm noticing now that Disney, for example, but other film companies are creating movies that cast the villain as the protagonist, if not the good guy, but as sort of like, this is an interesting character, let's make a whole movie about this person. Sometimes they try to redeem them, like in Maleficent, but sometimes they're just sort of, that's who they are, and they're bad, and because we like that. So what is it about villains that is appealing, is my question.
I can answer this one easy. So it's like a mix of passion and power. I think a lot of people, like even the best of heroes, like have that moment, that dark night of the soul, uncertainty. And I actually, when we talk about like modern heroes today, I always think of my husband as like, not because he's my husband, but he's actually he's in the medical field. He's working with like the coronavirus stuff that's going on right now, and he is just, he's this big burly man that lifts up his kids. And I like that. I like that he's a good dad and he works to save people's lives. And it's not an easy job. So, and I make the joke all the time. He goes to work and he saves real people, and I go to work and I kill a bunch of imaginary people. So, like my point with all this is like, there are days when he comes home and he's had a bad day, and it's just like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, you gotta feel, and like, he's like, well, because I need you to work. But it's also like, like I think a villain has that, they're more certain, and they've thrown everything that they have behind it as this like last big gamble. Like with Gaston and the wedding scenes, like everybody's here, we're just gonna get married. And in the Phantom, he's like, screw it, I'm just gonna kill a guy because I can't that I think every woman wants the man to do the impossible for the love of his life. And then sometimes that impossible level, I think it does actually hit that point where it's like, okay, this is actually a roadblock. It's like, it's nice that you wanted to slay the dragon, but to kill the townsfolk too.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting. So there's this way in which the villain is all in, and that's appealing in some way. What do you think, Spencer?
I'm going to start talking, and I think that at the end of it, I'm going to absolve you of your guilt, but I might not. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Great. Okay.
Because the first thing that I'm going to say. Great. Yes, exactly. And I am going to address what CJ said, but not immediately. So the most famous version, I think, of what you're talking about is John Milton's Paradise Lost, which is an epic poem about the fall of man, about the sin, the original sin, and the terrible consequences that now the earth is full of sin and we are all born with sin. And in it, arguably, by far, the most interesting and exciting character is portrayed as evil in the poem. He's very much sort of the great villain, but also God is kind of boring in this poem. And at least God the Father is kind of this disembodied voice, and Satan is this incredibly dynamic character with all these amazing lines. Like he says, better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. And that's something that we can all sort of identify with. And William Blake famously said, Milton was of the devil's party without knowing that he actually agreed with Satan's argument in various. So on the one hand, I think you could chalk this up to our also being sinful, right? So we also have in us the sort of logic and corruption that Satan is expressing there. So our prideful nature. But I actually think there's something more that, which is what related to what CJ was saying, that there is something missing sometimes in heroes that sometimes villains can provide. And in CJ's example, it's certainty and passion. And heroes often experience moments of self-doubt. And at their best moments, they are confident and bold, but inevitably they experience that. And one of the great things about sin, one of the attractive things about sin, is that it offers you this kind of easy route to something that is otherwise very difficult to achieve. So if you are evil, you can just plow forward without regarding anybody else's feelings or regarding anybody's disappointments, and have all this confidence. And so then in the moments when the heroes are having to go through their dark night of the soul, maybe the villain suddenly looks kind of more appealing. And I also think, Faith, that I am going to absolve you because in a lot of the movies and plays that you're talking about, either by artistic failing or by sort of mechanism of the plot, the villain in many instances will provide something that the hero doesn't. So in Phantom of the Opera, like the problem with that show is that Raoul is very boring and not very fun or exciting. And everything that he has to offer is like this kind of boxed in domestic life. The song that he sings is about that, basically. And so the Phantom, who is incredibly mysterious and tortured and strange, sort of provides that, but provides it in this sort of like way out of, astronomically out of proportion way, so that we could never imagine that Chrissy would ever get with him because he's just too crazy and stuff. And I think that maybe also Gaston, in the Beast, I think is a better structured story in this regard, because the Beast actually does have strength, but he's also, when we meet him, kind of broken and weak, and we don't really actually get to see him step into his strength except at the very end. And even then, we don't see him as the kind of man that he will eventually become. So maybe it's just that villains kind of have, because they are corrupt and because they have this kind of dark version of the thing that we want in heroes, they can often provide that when heroes are still kind of working their stuff out. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think I'm feeling so much better. No, but I think that I think one thing, kind of going off what you both have been saying, that is appealing about villains is that they are. I mean, if we're going back, I keep harping on this, but I like it. If we keep going with this idea of, we have these kind of inner selves or inner drives, and if we use them for good, then we're good, and if we use them for evil, then obviously in fiction, not in real life, if we use them for evil, then we're evil. The thing about these villains that I have described, like Gaston and the Phantom, and etc., is that the thing that makes them evil is something that actually is very, very appealing when used for the good, which is this kind of raw masculinity. And as you said, Spencer, the Beast kind of ends up being that, which is why I have in fact shifted my allegiance from Gaston to the Beast in my maturity. But
not heavily from Raoul to the Phantom, right?
Right, exactly. And I think the thing about the Phantom is that he is, I've written about this before, but he is the Beast, except that he doesn't have the reason to change, because Christine is this drip who doesn't really have the ability to say, like, hey, stop doing that. And in the way that Belle does. And I want to be careful, because it's not like, oh, we can change a man, a woman can change a man, she can't, but a man can change for a woman if he believes that she is worthy of his change and his channeling of his base urges into something better. And I think the Phantom kind of doesn't get that opportunity because there isn't really a reason for him, and he's kind of just gone off the deep end. And I think that, what's appealing about him is that he has all of this stuff that's actually really great. He's very passionate and he's creative and he loves so deeply and he wants so desperately to please. And, but he doesn't know, he's not civilized. He doesn't know how to do it. And there's something really appealing about raw masculinity. And except that in real life, we don't want people to murder other people, but there's something really appealing about that. So I think, and similarly with female villains, if we're going off of this idea of, for example, like the wicked stepmother, this notion of, a woman who has inverted or subverted her mother instinct so far that she is conniving and narcissistic and willing to do all of this insane stuff like steal babies and kill children and all of this stuff. That is kind of like, we can kind of be like, whoa, what's that about? Like, why are you doing that? And if they're doing it well, they have that thing which I was talking about the beginning, which is that they think they're doing the right thing. I think that's really compelling, and you want to figure that out. So yeah, I'll keep working on that. So as we sort of move, I want to transition us a little bit as we run out of time back to our bracket, and we are going to there is going to be a prize drawing at the end of this, which is very exciting. So I want to just know, not necessarily Disney, in general, do you both, you have a favorite villain in fiction?
Yeah.
Let me think about that.
Yeah, I have to think about it. I know that I was supposed to think about it before we started talking, and I did sort of think about it. And now, after our conversation, I feel that all of my ideas about villainy are unsettled and enriched and grown. I've changed. I've grown and changed, and so I solicited some ideas from my boyfriend before I came on the air, and he suggested Joffrey from Game of Thrones and Darth Vader from Star Wars, both of which I think are decent, definitely excellent villains and good sort of people. But I actually think that from the course of this conversation, I'm going to say something that I would not have said, which is that Satan from Paradise Lost is my favorite villain. Not the Satan of the Bible is very different and arguably not the Satan that we sort of think of when we think of Satan, but Milton's Satan is probably the best villain because he is undeniably awful and not somebody that you would ever want to tangle with or spend time with, and also profoundly complex and interesting, and one might even dare to say sympathetic, and that's part of what makes the poem so much more than just a pretty poem.
Yeah, excellent. CJ, do you have a favorite villain in fiction?
I have a lot of books I like to read, so so my favorite book, like officially, like I will tell people this, my favorite book is Till We Have Faces, which is C.S. Lewis's reimagining of the Psyche and Eros fairy tale. And Orel in that one is actually, she is kind of the villain in it, and she also gets to like play her princess role. I like that book best because every year I read it and I find something new I like about it, and I think it's compelling because it relates to kind of like my own life experiences, but also like in the more universal sense of never feeling like you're good enough, and her desperation to kind of make up for this, whether it's being clever, whether it's tending to her sister, to like these extreme measures, to trying to please the gods. I understand that a lot, and she does end up kind of like bringing about her own problems, obviously in the book, and I like that kind of story too, because I really do like the idea that evil usually ends up being stopped by its own hubris at some point. It's like a kill switch. Woo.
Great.
in general, I will say, like, I like megalomaniacs as there's a creative license that you can use with that. I think of like kind of like with the recent splurge of the whole go woke, go broke kind of thing. You have these kind of isolated power hungry virtue signalers in charge of Hollywood that are just out to crush the average person for being an imagined foe. And it's kind of like, I like that. You know, I feel bad for all the fandoms that they've blown up in recent months, but Star Wars included, which was my childhood. And I think, especially since I like Luke Skywalker is my favorite hero from like forever. I can name him easy. But the way that his character progression has progressed makes me angry. So I would say that's probably where I kind of sit with that. I like the self-destructive, sympathetic villain who's trying to do her best, but it's never good enough. And I like the megalomaniac who's just the moral arbiter who makes people suffer for their own good.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think those are all excellent picks, and I obviously have already revealed that some of mine being Gaston and the Phantom of the Opera, which I don't even want Phantom to be a villain, but clearly he is a villain. But I guess I do want to throw into the mix because, you know, CJ, you're talking about sort of trying your best, but, you know, the things are stacked, and we started talking about sort of things are stacked against you, or you're just your worldview is somehow wrong and whatever. So I did want to throw out there Javert from Les Miserables, because I think I find him to be a fascinating villain because he actually believes that he's right. This is kind of what I was talking about before, and it's really easy for us to see how he thinks that. He's a character who spends his entire life chasing after an escaped criminal. It just so happens that the escaped criminal is basically Jesus Christ. I mean, the escaped criminal is a really great guy, and or at least redeemed in some way. You know, he begins by stealing a loaf of bread, which is wrong, and breaking a window pane, which is wrong, but it's to feed his dying sister, and then he's put away for what ends up being 20 years, you know, for 10 years at first, and then he tries to escape, and then he's there some more, and he's there for 20 years, and then he breaks his parole. And so Javert is just like, he can't handle this, that he's broken the rules. And he has this idea that that's what God is. God is the rules. And if you don't follow the rules, you're not right, you're evil. And so his whole thing is that he thinks he's good, and Jean Valjean is evil, and really the truth is the opposite. And because of that, Javert is the bad guy and Valjean is the good guy in the story. And I think that that's a really interesting scenario. So I will throw him out there since I've already stated.
I think it ties in really nicely. You know, it does play into this idea that like you're like God is he always exists in like I said this before, like contradictions and like paradoxes aren't the same thing. And you can't really have justice without mercy. Like you have divine justice on one end and then divine mercy on the other. And I think that's where like Christ is the God that can hold the hand of sorrow and of joy and of reason and imagination and justice and mercy. And I really think you know, like when you just see the one side, it's very easy to make assumptions about God and about nature and everything like that. So
yes. And Spencer, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, what you say.
The excess.
I was, yeah. along the same lines, you know. I mean, first of all, I'd like to note that Valjean's sister's child was close to dead. They were starving.
And they were starving.
So, and he will starve again unless he learns the meaning of the law. But what you were saying is your point about Valjean being almost Jesus is almost exactly true, because what you're describing is a really fascinating feature for me where arguably there are no villains. I'm not so sure about Judas Iscariot. Judas is the one who betrays Jesus, and he does get, Satan enters into his heart. But a lot of the people who are part of Jesus' crucifixion, who Jesus does say, woe to those by whom the Son of Man, through whom the Son of Man is killed, are not in their own eyes scheming, conniving, dark, evil people. They're people who believe very, very strongly in a system of understanding the world and in a system of rules. That they're both the leaders of the Jewish temple and the Praetoriate, the Roman legate, sort of people enforcing Roman law. And they all have this idea about this is the way that it's done. And none of them kind of pauses to sort of realize that this is the Son of God. And they're all just sort of, well, but this is how this person did sort of cause a lot of trouble and is, making a lot of, raising a lot of confusion in society, and and so we all, I think, recognize that aspect of villainy in us, that we do have these kind of systems and ways of looking at the world. And if today Jesus came back, we can all sort of imagine that if everybody you trusted was telling you, this person is a bad agent, and everybody was sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Anyway, I was getting on a tangent, but you see what I'm saying, that if everybody you trusted was telling you this person is a threat to society, you can totally imagine being like, oh yeah, it must be a threat to society, and then suddenly like, some God is on the cross, and like, yeah, it's pretty crazy that way.
Well, this is totally fascinating, and we could go on forever, but we are running out of time, so I'm going to bring us back now to Disney March Madness. I'm even going to make it say Disney March Madness right here, because not.
Oh my gosh.
So I know. So so as I said earlier, we are at the end now of round 2 and heading into, I believe it's the semifinals, but I don't understand sports terms, so we're just going to leave that there. We are down to the Evil Queen, which is Snow White's stepmother, Maleficent, Scar, and Ursula, I believe, are the ones that we have now. And so do you guys have any picks? Who do you think is going to win it?
I guess Maleficent would probably be my pick. She's got a lot of following. I've seen a lot of comments about her, and I do think that there's a lot more mystery attached to her, like in some ways that it just seems interesting. Like you can kind of understand the Evil Queen wanting to put Snow White in the sleeping death. Oh, she's jealous of her looks. That's not. But with Maleficent, it's like, oh, I didn't get invited to a party, and this, I do think like some people have missed out on how much of an insult that is, like from medieval times, because it is the 17th century. But I also think like there's a lot about her that people don't know, and it's kind of like people are drawn to what they don't understand and stuff. And she doesn't. I do kind of like that she doesn't actually want to like kill anybody. She's just, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and screw around with your life really badly.
Yeah, she does have, I think, the scariest or the most twisted and evil plot, which is that Aurora is going to sleep for 100 years, and Prince Philip and not age, and Prince Philip is going to be in the dungeon aging and somehow staying alive for 100 years past whatever age he currently is, and then he's going to ride on his old, also still alive, randomly horse and kiss the 16-year-old Aurora and wake her up, except now she's awakening to this decrepit.
I want to say, like, from a British, like, kind of history point of view, that is a legitimate fear, like, from British history. Just getting, like, sold off for a title or for a fortune to this old, decrepit-looking guy when you're just wanting Prince Charming instead.
Listen, Spencer, do you have, from those picks, so Evil Queen, Maleficent, Scar, and Ursula, do you have a pick that you think is going to go all the way?
This is really hard because I can see a good argument for any one of those four. I think when you submit these questions to like a large aggregate like Twitter, you always end up with the most kind of, it's hard to talk about this without, I don't mean to be negative about this at all, but you end up with the most kind of obvious choices, like the people that are, kind of famous, down the middle, really archetypal characters. So we've already lost, I think, a lot of the really offbeat villains that I like we've lost Jafar, and we've lost Gaston, and we've lost, and that's kind of like always the way of these things. But I think that does end you up with kind of the most concentrated villain, and I think, Scar is my favorite on the list. He has the best song. He's really cool, and he's the one that I most kind of like and maybe want to relate to. But that's an interesting example of a movie where I like the hero too. Simba is really interesting and good, and Mufasa is also great, and Scar. There's just a lot of great characters in that movie. But Scar's not going to win. I don't think. I think it's going to be Maleficent, and I think for all the reasons that you said, because she is kind of the Disney. She combines all of the aspects of great Disney villains. She turns into a big scary thing at the end, which is a great hallmark of great Disney villains. And she has a really terrifying evil plot, and she's sort of unhinged, but also interesting and fun. And yeah, I think she's got the whole package. She's probably
Yeah, I think so too. And I agree with CJ that most people seem to win, as evidenced by their original bets. So we allowed people to place bets before this happened and lock in their bets. The way that it works is at the end of each round, if your original bet is still in the running, then you get entered to win a prize. And so we are actually, now that we're at the end of the show, we're actually going to live draw the name for the round 2 prize. And CJ, do you want to tell us what they're going to win?
All right, you guys will get a free copy of my book, The Princess of the Peacock, and it's actually going to be the audiobook too, so you'll get to hear more of Spencer's beautiful voice.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. So
it's a great book. I've read the whole thing because I would have read it anyway, but I have read it out loud, so I can tell you it is very good.
I have also read it. I know.
So
yes, and the audio version is also very good. So if you are our current winner, you are in for a treat. So I have put all the names of the people who are still in it into a random name selector on the internet, and I am going to now press the button to see who wins. So you guys should give me a drum roll. Ready? And drum roll, please. The winner is, I think the winner is actually watching, or at least was watching. It is Joel Estes. So Joel, you win. Yay. So we'll send you an email with your prize. So we have now come to the end of our show. I will make this go away. And I shouldn't telegraph that I'm actually the one doing that. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you both so much for being here, C.S. Johnson and Spencer Klavan. Thank you for being with us. And thank you all out there for watching. I saw your comments. I'm really bad at multitasking, so I didn't write back to anybody, but or maybe one person. But it was really good to be here, and I hope that you're all safe and healthy and hanging in there. And if you want to reach out to me about anything or questions, comments, just say hi. There's my website. You can find me there or on Twitter. And we'll see you next time. And check in with us. Make sure you're following CJ,
yay,
and me for more. And also make sure you're following Spencer, just because. I can't imagine anyone who's following me is not following him. But anyway, follow us all. And it was really great to have you guys. Thank you so much for being on the show.
For what it's worth, I think Spencer makes it.
It was great. It was so much fun, and I am sorry that my internet was so bad. What did you say? I missed that one.
I just accidentally put your name. Okay. Anyway, yes. Don't worry about the internet. It was great. Everybody should watch this episode, and I will put it up on the internet for anyone who missed it. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.